guys! Today we'll be recapping a manhwa called The Princess's Double Life. Please like the video and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Enjoy! Our story begins in an unlikely place for a princess. A prison. A young girl sits inside a cell where she is visited by a man in uniform. Let's not beat around the bush. This guy is crazy handsome, and clearly royalty too, from the look of his clothes. He tells the girl that he needs her help, at which point she perks up and flashes him a smile. But the man wants more than just a favor, because this guy has his sights set on becoming emperor. And that's no small feat. You see, the Hexen Empire already has an emperor, and a successor who is alive and well. And that is not this guy. He's not even second in line to the throne. He's the youngest brother of the emperor, which puts him third in line behind his older brother and the crown prince. So then, how the heck does he plan on reaching that crown? The girl in the cell also seems surprised. Actually, she just laughs in his face. This guy is the Grand Duke Hexen van Hexen. Famous for his combat skills, he is known as the Black Wolf of the battlefield, strength of the empire. Only problem is, he's not got half the brain needed for a position of emperor, and he has double the bloodlust of the usual man. And pretty much everyone knows it. He's never received any marriage proposals despite his status because he's pretty much the shame of the imperial family. That's why he wants to team up with this girl, to use her brains to get closer to the crown. And even though she knows he doesn't have a chance, she has no choice but to agree. You see, she's a death row prisoner. It's either help this bozo or die. With the agreement set, he promises to pick her up first thing in the morning, freeing her from life in prison to become his new tactician. You should know, by the way, that this girl is more than meets the eye. She entered the prison entirely of her own free will, pretending to be arrested and taken in. She was planning to escape at dawn anyway, so I guess she didn't need to take the offer? The truth is, the girl actually has been reborn in this world from a whole nother universe. In her past life, she was a talented scammer who tried her hand at just about everything. But she flew too close to the sun and one day tricked the wrong person. She was murdered at the age of 28 and arrived in this world as a poor young beggar. Do you think she's learned from the consequences of her crimes in her past life? No, obviously not. She's doing just the same in this one, only this time, she's messing with an empire. The world she is reincarnated to is a bit like 18th century Europe, except with magic. And that magic makes it a heck of a lot easier to commit crimes and scam people. That's how this girl has been operating, slowly making a name for herself as the most famous swindler in this world, known as the Faceless Criminal, or even sometimes Viper. Which is a very cool name. I mean, Viper? Surely that's every criminal's dream nickname. Obviously, as a con artist, she's not exactly popular, but one thing is undisputed, and that's her genius. That's why the Grand Duke came to her for help after all. But since she trusts her abilities more than his potential, this faceless criminal is going to make a break for it. Using a simple candle to melt her fork into a key, she unshackles herself in no time. The plan is to make an escape through the sewers. She's got about half an hour to get in and out the other side before the drain is scheduled to fill up with, well, you can guess what. If she's not fast enough, not only will she drown, but it'll be one seriously stinky death. But she must have made it, because when the Grand Duke returns the next morning, he finds her cell empty. Uh-oh, those guards are in serious trouble. Immediately, the Duke orders his butler Owen to investigate the escape. But the clues are all laid out for them. The melted fork, the shackles, the open drain. They even managed to figure out how she got hold of the fork in the first place. Since the dining halls have metal detectors, she used a decoy spoon to trick the guards. And when the alarms went off, she gave them the spoon rather than the fork hidden under her clothes. After the whole story comes out, the Duke isn't angry. Actually, he's impressed. Well, that is, until he hears the news that she has stolen the Grand Duke's ring from the treasury. The ring contains a blue mineral known as elfair that symbolizes the imperial family's noble bloodline. It's basically his birthright and a personal treasure that proves his status. They're often imbued with magical properties and hid in surprising places, since they're almost as valuable as the imperial family members themselves. Oh wait, I get it. The reason the Viper locked herself up wasn't just for fun. The plan all along was to steal this ring. She knew its location and had to get caught in this prison to have a shot at it. Wow, she really has balls to steal, this girl. Unfortunately for her, the Grand Duke wasn't quite so stupid as she thought. Expecting an escape attempt, He had her bound with an enchantment between master and slave. Whenever the Duke activates it, the Viper will suffer greatly and instinctively return to her master. And if that sounds messed up, that's because it is. The poor Viper was planning to take the ring and flee to the Eisenbach Empire, using it to parade as the illegitimate child of the Hexen Empire and start a new life. She's just enjoying the taste of freedom when suddenly her heart begins to pound, and she falls to the ground in agony. Since she's familiar with poisons, the Viper immediately starts to analyze her symptoms, trying to figure out who managed to slip her a dose without her noticing. She crawls toward a pair of boots, and suddenly the pain stops. When she looks up, she finds Prince Charming himself, Rexid Van Hessen, with the smuggest smile in the world on his face. She gives him the ring, but in a twist, he slips it back on her finger. He promises that if she fulfills her end of the deal to make him emperor, she can have anything she wants. And I mean, really, with an offer like that, what's a girl to do? She's obviously going to take the deal. And then, to make sure she doesn't run away again, he picks her up. Like, literally just lifts and carries her away. Well, I guess that's one situation she can't wriggle out of. He slings her in a carriage headed for the imperial palace, all the while keeping a close eye on the Viper. As his butler warned him, he must never trust a word she says. Never get too comfortable around her. Which sounds cold, but she's kind of proven it already. He asks for her real name, since no amount of investigation can turn up any facts about her origin. But the truth is a little sadder than he's expecting. It's not like she's just hidden it really well. She actually wasn't ever given one. No parents to look after her, no one to register her birth, and so naturally, no name. With a cheeky smile, she offers to let the Grand Duke choose one for her, if he wants. A little flustered, Rexid ducks the question. Seeing she's made him uncomfortable, she moves on to an even more awkward topic, the question of how he managed to poison her. The Duke could easily tell her it was a spell, but he's actually kind of ashamed. So instead, he reaches over and says how surprising it is to find a genius con artist with such a beautiful face. Which seems kind of cute, until the Viper realizes he's actually trying to see if it's a mask. Wow, for a member of royalty, this guy really has no manners, huh? That's our Grand Duke for you. No manners, but lots of money. Before they get to the palace, he makes a detour to a dress shop to get his new criminal assistant some more appropriate clothing, and clears out the entire store. Pfft, show off? The Viper is overwhelmed with the number of luxurious gowns that all belong to her with the snap of his fingers. Rexid is surprised. Given how many famous heists she's pulled off, he thought she would have more than one of these fancy dresses. But despite being a scammer, the faceless criminal isn't quite so materialistic as you might expect. She actually spent a lot of her money on raising orphans in the alleys and paying for their medicine. So luxury like this is still new and exciting to her. That's kind of touching. And the Duke seems to think so too. From now on, he says he'll buy everything she wants. Ugh, where can I find a man like this? Is anyone else kind of falling for this big dumb bozo? Taking him at his word, the Viper picks a pretty pink dress and vanishes into the changing rooms. The Duke sits and waits for her outside, but as the minutes tick on, he starts to get suspicious. After all, he just left the most famous con artist in the world alone with a helpless attendant. He really is a bozo. Rexid rushes into the changing room to find the attendant wrapped up in lace and with a knife pointed at her throat. The Viper, of course, is nowhere to be found. The terrified attendant reveals that she took the dress and ran off to the nearest shopping street. Although, I guess she could be anywhere by now. Her nickname is literally the Viper after all. She's fast and she's venomous as heck. Speaking of venomous, the Duke is quick to activate the enchantment on his wrist. Meanwhile, his little snake is out running through the streets, and she's wandered into some dodgy neighborhoods. Which seems like kind of a stupid move if you ask me. I mean, what happens if she faints somewhere like this? The same thought is on the Viper's mind, so she moves quickly through the streets. It's not long before her path is blocked by a large, intimidating man the size of a house. He likes the look of her, and lunges after her ring. No stranger to guys like this, the Viper dodges and grabs his hand, raising her knee to deliver a blow to his you-know-what. But just before she can make contact, the poison kicks in and she drops to the ground. Now the penny finally drops. She realizes this must be a spell, since this time there isn't as much pain, just paralysis. And just like last time, she starts to crawl instinctively down the street. The thug finds this very funny. He thinks she's taken some kind of drugs and grabs her to see if she's still got any. Just before he can start feeling her up, he jerks backward, blood spraying from his mouth. Looks like Prince Charming showed up just in time. After yelling at the Viper, he grabs the thug by the head and lifts him into the air. Okay, whoa! I didn't realize this guy was that strong. Maybe she should just give in and stick by his side if this is what he's capable of. The thug reaches out, but Rexit catches his hand right away, and well, now there's even more blood. He reminds the Viper what he said about not losing that ring, which sounds 20 times scarier when he's still holding a man in the air. As if he was no more than a sack of potatoes, he drops the thug to the ground. By now, the spell is clear to both of them, and the Viper knows there's no point running away again, especially when she's wearing his precious ring. Furious, Rexit picks her up and swings her over his shoulder, fireman style, and says he won't let her feet touch the ground until the moment they reach his castle. I mean, can you blame him? It seems like the only way to ensure she isn't running away is to hold her the entire time. But I wouldn't be complaining if I was her, especially when he shuts her up with a warning to be a good girl, or else. And he sticks to his word. Owen the butler is there at the doors to greet them when they walk in, with the Viper still slung over his shoulder. He only puts her down once they're in the hall, allowing Owen to welcome her formally to the castle of the Grand Duke. He introduces himself and hands her a very thick contract. Butler Owen is in charge of just about everything in this castle, so obviously he knows the ins and outs of their arrangement too. Being as smart as she is, the Viper immediately realizes he must have been the one to have thought of putting her under a spell. She asks him for a way to break it, and Owen tells her straight up there isn't one. It's ancient magic binding a master and slave. It only ends when one of them dies. Well, that's hardcore. The first thing the Viper thinks is that she'll have to kill Rexit, but the butler is one step ahead of her. It's not that simple. If the master dies first, the blood in the slave's body will freeze and the slave will die too. Not only is that hella metal, but it also looks like the Duke didn't know about it. He grabs Owen by the collar and starts yelling at him. He's mad that Owen didn't tell him all the details, but as his butler rightfully points out, Rexit never would have agreed if he had, and this is pretty much the only way to keep her in line. Owen catches the Viper watching them and tells her the Earl Leishugi committed suicide after blowing all his money on her. 2 other barons believed her scams and lost all their money, having to give up their title and become slaves to work off the debt. Of course, all these people were doing pretty illegal things. That's why the Viper chose them, but it doesn't make the scam any less vicious. The point is, she's dangerous, and they have to resort to extreme measures to keep a hold of her. At least in this deal, the Duke and the castle staff will respect her as a business partner and treat her like a person rather than a criminal, which is all well and good until you remember the whole "till death do us part" pact. That bit is pretty inhumane. So the Viper doesn't have much choice but to sign the contract. She does, however, have one condition. If the Viper becomes useless or he no longer needs her help, then he must cancel the contract and the enchantment with it. With that agreed, she signs the contract. Rexit walks her down to the castle treasury, where it takes her all of 2 minutes to amass a small fortune hidden in her dress. It's alright though. Rexit did say she could take what she wanted after all. Once again, the Grand Duke is more impressed than insulted. He doesn't seem to care much about the money or the wealth attached to his name. He just wants the title of Emperor, and that's it. He takes her over to a rune circle and places the contract in the middle. Apparently, they need to fill the drain with their blood to seal the deal. Which is kind of gross, but at this point, I expect no less from the Black Wolf of the battlefield. It seems like an appropriate time for the Viper to bring up his reputation, so she does. He's supposed to be a fearsome warrior, but he's already hesitating over drawing blood from her. The Viper reminds him that should he become emperor, he can never let his enemies see any sign of weakness. As if to prove himself, Rexit grabs the knife and slashes along his arm, filling up most of the drain by himself. From his con artist, he takes no more than a finger prick of blood. And with that, the contract is binding. Their lives are entwined forever, so Rexit asks her not to lie to him from now on. Yeah, like that's gonna happen. The Viper does give him one concession though. After all, he was right about the mask. At least, half right anyway. Because her real hair is pink and short. If you ask me, she looks cuter this way. She says this is her real face and she hasn't ever shown it to anyone. But at this point, who's gonna believe her? Especially when the next thing she does is take out her contacts. After their contract is signed and all the masks are off, the Duke escorts her to a beautiful big bedroom, which she has all to herself. Soon, a pair of staff come in, named Marco and Masha, who confuse her for a potential marriage suitor. They bring in some dinner, at which point the Duke picks a name and introduces her as Rosica. Good choice. It definitely suits her. Masha and Marco, who are actually mother and son and have known the Duke since he was born, seem to like Madame Rosica quite a lot, and gossip away as they bring in dishes. They mention someone named Raven, a member of the royalty who was around the same age as Rexid and used to spend a lot of time with him as a kid. I guess that must be the Crown Prince, the first in line for the throne, and the first one the Duke will have to dispose of if he wants to reach the Emperor's throne. After dinner is done, Rosica asks him about them, the members of his family that he will have to get rid of. She's already planning the best way to take care of the Crown Prince when Rexid shows her into a cold room and pulls the cover of a coffin to reveal, yep, that's right, the Crown Prince is already dead. Though you and I would probably suspect Rexid right away, Rosica is a professional. She quickly realizes two things. One, that the Duke did not kill his childhood best friend, the Crown Prince. And two, that he doesn't actually want to become emperor. He wants revenge. Honestly, I have no idea how she figured all that out. But Rexid seems surprised and doesn't contradict her. Rosica believes that someone must be trying to frame the Duke for the murder, which means her first task is to clear his name by finding the real murderer. After all, if the Duke is beheaded for treason, then Rosica dies too. Luckily for him, it's in her best interest to keep him alive. That night, Rosica is sneaking out of her room when she is grabbed by Owen, who immediately presses a knife to her throat. I guess that's the downside of being so good with disguises. People won't recognize you when you take the mask off. Rexid comes out just in time to shove him off. Once the lights are on and the air is cleared, Owen apologizes. Apparently, he used to be in a class for assassins, which explains his quick reflexes and slightly sinister motives. He also seems curious about whether this is her real face or not, and is just reaching to check for a mask when Rexid stops him and confirms her identity. This guy really is too gullible. Like, how does he know that? She could be an old man with a crooked spine for all we know. But there's another reason why the Duke seems to have softened. When Owen put a knife to her neck, he noticed an expression he's seen before. That's not the face someone makes when they're confused and scared. According to the seasoned warrior, that's a face by someone who has seen death and nearly died themselves. Little does he know how close he is to the truth. After all, Rosica did die once before being reborn in this world as the criminal we know today. She heads off to deal with her injury while Rex reminisces on his last memories of Raven, the Crown Prince. He was a cheerful guy, but he lived in fear, always worried about assassination attempts and wishing he could be a normal person without the stress of royalty. Turns out, he was right to be afraid, considering what happened to him. The next morning, Rosica bursts into the breakfast room in a cheerful mood, surprising Owen, who still thinks of her as a cutthroat scammer, the Viper. No sooner has she sat down than Rosica is demanding changes already. Although the castle has been manned by only 4 people in the past, she now wants 50 servants, a mix of professionals and low-ranking nobles. She also wants a title herself. Owen thinks this is all ridiculous, but Rexid agrees to everything, trusting that it's all for a good reason. The butler is heavily suspicious, and after he asks a ton of irritating questions, Rosica invites him to her room so they can talk in private and clear the air. But instead of giving him a chance to voice his suspicions, she asks him some very personal questions about his height and weight instead. She tells him he could stand to lose about 3 kilograms, which, Rosica, babe, none of your business, sweetie. But of course, as always with the Viper, these questions have a purpose even if we don't know it just yet. Meanwhile, Rex has been reading over Raven's old letters, trying to find an answer to his sudden death. The letters contain all the heartache and grief of someone struggling, and it's obviously very heartbreaking for the Duke to read them. But behind one of the more upsetting letters, he finds a note he hadn't seen before. A note acknowledging his death and apologizing for leaving Rex all alone. Wait. Does this mean that he took his own life? Oh, that's so sad. The pressure of the imperial family got to him in the end. Rex is shaking as he reads it. That's how Rosica finds him when she walks in. He looks more vulnerable than we've ever seen him, and when she gets close enough, he grabs her for support. Just after, Owen walks in wearing a mask to make him look just like the deceased Crown Prince. I'm not sure how he could be so easily fooled, but the poor Duke is emotional, and so he doesn't question it. He just walks straight over and pulls the boy he thinks is Raven in for a hug. Feeling guilty, Rosica has to intervene. She pulls them apart as Owen pulls the mask off. Even worse, the note was written by Rosica too. It's not real. None of it is. Wow, this is devastating. Imagine thinking you'd found a goodbye letter from your dearest friend only to discover it had all been fabricated? I guess that's what you get for hiring a scammer as your tactician. The poor Duke drops the note and starts to laugh. which is deeply concerning. That night, he spends most of the evening by himself, smoking a cigarette in the gardens, while Owen and Rosika watch him from the balcony. When he asks her about the letter, she admits she just wanted to see if she could copy the handwriting. Turns out, she was far better than she thought, and the whole thing went too far. Owen opens up about Raven's death, spilling some key details to Rosika. The two were close as children and remained close as well into their adulthood. Even though the Duke was posted out in the remote and harsh Drax territory, the Crown Prince continued to visit frequently. In fact, he was on his way to the Duke's castle when he was killed. That's how they know someone was trying to frame him. It's obvious that whoever killed Raven is out to ruin Rex's reputation too. Obviously, after hearing all of this, Rosika feels incredibly guilty about the whole suicide note thing. Who wouldn't? She made him so stressed that he literally started smoking again. She ventures out to the gardens to make a proper apology. He doesn't seem interested in talking about Raven. Actually, he's just worried that she's standing outside in a thin dress. He throws her his jacket and tells her not to feel so bad. In fact, out of everyone who ever met him, Rosika seemed to know him best. Her letter was so impressive, so convincing that it brought him to tears. So either she really is as good a scammer as her reputation, or she's actually more sympathetic than she lets on. I reckon the truth is probably both. In a rare moment of pity, Rosika asks the Duke what his old friend was like. Despite being fearsome and vicious, and so far pretty mean too, we get to see the soft side of Rex while he talks about his precious friend. He always felt Raven was too gentle for the royal family, too sweet to survive in a world like this. But he was also kind, knowing that Rex had no one to call mother or father. Raven stopped calling his parents that so as not to make him jealous. He always stood by the Duke, even when he was getting punished and it wasn't his fault. While saying all of this, the Duke starts to cry. He gets embarrassed easily, but Rosika doesn't seem to mind. In fact, she uses his jacket sleeves to wipe his tears, which is so insanely adorable. She tells him that someone like Raven would have wanted nothing more than for the Duke to live happily, and asks what she can do to help. Whether it's revenge, becoming the Emperor, whatever it is, she'll do it. Wow, who knew someone known as the Faceless Criminal could have a heart too? Is it just me, or are these two really cute together? The next day, Rex rewards her kindness in the most extra way possible. She asked for a title, so he's awarded her the name of Princess. How's that for a thank you? Being Princess means she has the right to inherit the throne of the Grand Duke's house. And if you're thinking, hey, wouldn't she have to be related to him to be a princess? Well, you're right. But Rex is a Grand Duke, and he can do whatever he wants. Rosika immediately refuses, but once Owen explains, it starts to sound more reasonable. To give her a random title would look suspicious, but since everyone knows he has no interest in marriage, it makes more sense for him to choose an heir and successor from someone close to him. Like this, the Viper won't attract the attention of the imperial family, but she will have more power, so actually, it's pretty clever. And Rex even promises to set her free and relinquish the position once their contract is done. So with the terms all explained, Rosika signs the contract and immediately starts calling Rex Daddy. Right. Well, that's a slightly unfortunate side effect, but at least she's a princess. Now, the next step is to inform the nobles of the North that they have a new princess. That will mean inviting them all to the Drax castle to meet Rosika for themselves. In preparation for their arrival, the Viper begins to interrogate Rex on why he is so opposed to marriage. If you've ever read a manhwa before or any kind of romance fic, you'd know that no one is ever just opposed to marriage. There's always a reason, or better yet, a broken heart. And the Faceless Criminal seems to have sniffed his out right away. She's been suspicious of the name he gave her, since it just came out so naturally. In a moment of silence, she corners him and asks who is Rosika. The Duke insists that he doesn't have a secret lover or a past affair or anything like that. It's just that one day, he wants to name a daughter Rosika. Yeah, right. And how does he plan to have a daughter if he never wants to marry? I don't think this guy has thought this one through. As part of her introduction ceremony, Rosika wants to invite the king and his concubines from the Emirate of Levita, a border kingdom that has wanted to invade the empire for quite some time. The only reason they haven't managed it so far is that big hunk of muscle right there, stationed at the snowy northern border. Now that the preparations are fully underway, all those extra servants are being put to use, and the castle is bustling with activity. Rex already seems stressed, and he only gets angrier once his princess begins his etiquette training. You would think the man third in line to the throne would have been taught decent manners, but from what we've seen so far, I think it's fair to say politeness isn't his forte. Rosika makes him read some compliments for practice, but coming from him, they sound more threatening than sweet. He has caught on to one thing though. This is not just etiquette training. The Viper is preparing him to flirt with the Princess Levita, no less. Her plan is to take the Emirate of Levita, capturing their side to take the throne. And the first part of that is marrying their princess. Looks like all that questioning was really just part of her plan. She really is one sneaky snake. Despite his protests, Rosica assures him this is a necessary evil, and the only way to put him on the throne. He's still not happy about it, but Rex doesn't complain again, and soon the day comes for the royal family of Levita to arrive. His tactician asks him to practice the pickup lines one more time, and to her utter shock, this time he gets it. Actually, he's so good that the both of them just sort of stand there blushing for a minute. He made the most famous con artist in the world totally speechless. Now that's some serious riz. A little embarrassed, the two head over to meet the Levita delegation, who have arrived 2 days ahead of their nobles to allow the princess and the duke a chance to get to know one another. The king of Levita introduces himself first, and boy does he look scary. I hope Rex treats his daughter right, otherwise there'll be some serious consequences. Rosica is the next to introduce herself and makes a very good impression. So good, in fact, that the king brings lots of presents and goods to celebrate her position as princess. As usual, she is good at spinning lots of white lies to make the duke look like a good neighbor. But then the princess of Levita comes forward and, well, let's just say she's intimidating as heck. Tall with silver hair and red eyes, she immediately comes off as very cool. And just like the rest of her family, she warms to Rosica immediately. Just more proof that she's so good at her damn job. She chose her words very carefully, took a different angle for every royal member that she approached. Meanwhile, Rex is over there sulking like an overgrown puppy. Unfortunately, there's one member of the Levita family who isn't so easily swayed. The first heir to the Emirate of Levita, Prince Harom. He looks far meaner and less civilized than his other family members. He takes an interest in Rosica, reaching for her just in time for Rex to shove himself in the way. Well, ladies, now we know he's the protective type. Immediately, the air changes. The Duke sternly tells his guest to speak politely to his princess, and Harom soon apologizes. He actually seems to like Rex. I guess one bloodthirsty warrior knows how to speak to another bloodthirsty warrior. Though this guy is a little overkill. While he's reveling in the memories of skinning rioters, his sister the princess quickly grabs Harom back and apologizes on his behalf. When they get back inside the palace and the royal family are sent to rest, Rex tries to correct what the Levita prince said before. He may have helped suppress the rioters, but he never had anything to do with skinning prisoners. The Viper didn't question it. I'm sure she's seen way worse things in her lifetime. But clearly, the Duke didn't want her to think he was such a cruel commander. Aside from his own concerns, Harom's outburst did reveal something important. Based on the king and the princess's reactions, they can tell that the Levita family is very concerned about being seen as barbarians. Despite their humble roots, he wants their lineage to be more like the noble royalty of the empire. In fact, he's so desperate to protect that image that he's actually killed his children in the past when they were too barbaric. Which is totally insane. How can anyone kill their own kids, no matter what they did? Rosica takes all of this into account, but it doesn't change the current plan. So she shoves Rex away and demands he ask the princess for a walk. He didn't make the best first impression upon arrival. That boy has got some schmoozing to do. While the two are getting better acquainted, Owen and Rosica hide in the bushes like kids to see how it's going. Despite all his oddities and quirks, Rex actually seems to be doing well. And for some reason, that doesn't bring a smile to Rosica's face. I mean, I think we all know the reason. Part of Rex's success is due to the present he gave to the princess, a beautiful necklace which used to be the national treasure of Levita and was given to the Duke as a trophy after the recent rebel lockdown. He decided to give it back to her, but he kind of flubs the delivery. Instead of fitting it around her neck, he kind of just throws it at her. Nice one, Rex. Real smooth. Next, he tries one of the pickup lines they practiced, but it all goes horribly wrong. Instead of giving the punchline, he just insults her father, the literal king of the country he's attempting ally with. Did anyone teach this kid diplomacy when he was younger? He really is the embarrassment of the empire. Later, he insults her again at lunch, commenting on how much she's eaten and acting like she's going to get indigestion. Really, this guy is hopeless. That means it's time for Rosica to come in and fix all his mistakes. While the princess is teaching her how to shoot, she takes the opportunity to ask whether her and her brother get along. The answer is no, like really no. The princess sees Prince Haram as responsible for the rebel uprising since he has such a terrible reputation with their subjects. Rosika slyly suggests she should be queen instead and goes on a whole speech about how heirs who aren't worthy of the throne should be eliminated. It's kind of obvious what she's aiming for, but the princess takes it to heart nonetheless. Now that she's planted the seed, all that remains is to make her brother trip up and cause the king to turn against him. It looks like Haram is already working on that for her. While Rosika is walking the halls, a teary-eyed maid comes running out with the prince on her tail. Clearly something has happened, but the maid, whose name is Layla, refuses to tell. Rosika sends her away and drops the mask, being honest about how much she dislikes Haram. She's about as rude as she can be, and even gives him a light slap across the cheek. That's when Haram flies into a rage, lifting a hand to strike her back. As usual, Rex is just in time to block the hit. Always the knight in shining armor. Although this time, Rosika's plan would have worked better if she actually had got hit. Rex is cold and cruel. He doesn't seem to care one bit about maintaining diplomatic relations, and even tells Rosika to hit him back if she fancies it. When she lets slip about what happened to Layla, that's when he really starts to see red. Rex hits him hard across the face, and his mouth starts bleeding like crazy. And what's worse is he pulls out a knife next, threatening to rip Haram apart. Uh-oh. Now I'm really not so sure this is going according to plan. Rosika steps in between them, trying to convince the Duke to calm down. They're still acting pretty violent, so the only thing she can do is to start talking about his little friend, if you catch my drift. She starts insinuating that it's so small it won't work properly, and then goes as far as saying he must be a eunuch. In a very weird play, she offers Haram a bet. If he does actually have all the working parts down below, then he can have the title of Duchess of Drax. At least, that's her offer. Then it all goes to pieces when Rex intervenes, grabbing the imperial ring and using it to cast a spell. It turns out the ring has a hidden property. It can record situations so that anything said or done can be replayed at a later date. It also records oaths and delivers them to the Guardian Sanctuary, so anything sent in there is kind of a big deal. For the sake of his pride, he repeats what has happened to the ring, while Rosika buries her face in her hands. Does he have to be so friggin' noble all the time? Come on, Rex, now is not the moment to show off. The deal is set. If the prince is not a eunuch, then Rex will kneel before him and renounce his title. And because he set it to the damned ring, he can't go back on his word now. If he does, he can never be in line for the throne of emperor. Once the prince has walked off laughing, Rosika scolds him. The Duke only did it because he was trying to follow her lead, but now they have an impossible situation on their hands. They need to find a way, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this, they need to find a way to make Prince Haram lose his manhood in the next 2 days. It sounds insane, because it is. Obviously, word of this crazy bet reaches back to the ears of the Emperor Robert Van Hessen, who is not pleased to hear what his younger brother has been up to. While he and his inner circle are meeting to discuss the Duke's actions, they've received a letter from Raven, the Crown Prince. As we know, the Crown Prince is very much deceased, so this must be the forgery that Rosika made. Well, if it's good enough to fool his family, then she must be pretty damn talented. The letter requests some manpower, something about delivering gifts back to the Imperial Palace after his trip to the Drax estate. Second in line to the throne, Ride Van Hessen decides to accompany the party himself. Looks like it's time for a brotherly reunion, though I have a feeling that will only end in tears. After the letter arrives, a suspicious figure in a mask and robe visits a blonde boy with one red eye and a scar over his face. Now, I don't think it takes a genius to work out that this kid is clearly a bad guy. Add to that he's playing with a Rubik's Cube, which is like the classic evil genius stereotype. But also, hang on, how did a medieval magical universe end up with Rubik's Cubes? Anyway, the person in the mask reports that the Crown Prince is not dead, something that Rubik's Cube Boy was clearly hired to ensure. Both of them seem confused by this sudden turn of events. In fact, the blonde boy is so angry that he tells the masked man to get out. He says he has a sudden urge to kill someone. Jeez, talk about anger issues. The blonde assassin decides to go up and check, and if he finds the Crown Prince alive, he swears to take care of it himself this time. Meanwhile, back at the Grand Duke's palace, guess who else has a Rubik's Cube and is playing with it right now? The Viper. It turns out they don't exist in this world, so she made one herself when she was a kid. Now, doesn't that seem suspicious? I'm sure there's a connection between Rosika and that evil blonde kid. It can't be a coincidence. She explains the concept to Rex and shows him how to solve it, leaning very closely to him while she does. The poor baby Duke gets quickly flustered and his face goes red. So he suddenly changes the topic and asks why she became a scammer. Oh, Rex, you couldn't be more obvious if you tried. But he points out that she's clever enough to make money without using all these scams and tricks. Rosika has never had a legal job, not in her past life or now, so who knows what could have happened if she'd taken a different path. It all started in middle school when she and a friend were being bullied by a group of girls. Her friend had a pet rabbit inside her locker and the bullies locked it inside. Worried her pet would suffocate, she begged for the key, only to have the girls refuse. Wow! That's truly horrible! If I were her, I would have thrown a punch at this point. Instead of letting her friend be humiliated, Rosika stepped up and offered to open the locker. Using just a hairpin, she managed to pick the lock and free the bunny, who was perfectly safe. Of course, for her moment of heroism, there had to be repercussions. The bully was furious about being shown up, so she told their teacher that Rosika was the class thief. And since everyone saw her just pick a lock, well, it was hard to disprove. Even though she was innocent, Rosika's mother had come to the school and apologized, handing back over 2 million won worth of school fees that their thief had supposedly stolen. After hearing all of this, Rex is mad as heck on her behalf, which is kind of cute. But that's how Rosika ended up being a scammer. Once everyone already sees you as a thief, I guess there's no incentive to be a good girl anymore. She got her revenge too, stealing a load of stuff from classmates and teachers and framing the bully for it. She was sent to a disciplinary meeting where the whole truth came out. Rosika and her mother's names were cleared, and the Viper had already been born. Rex is pretty impressed by this story and suddenly gets a little sentimental. Even though it makes him a fool, he says he'll always believe her. After all, no one in the world would trust the famous Viper. So wouldn't it be nice to have one person who was always unconditionally on her side? He also says that after this whole contract is up, he wants her to have a comfortable life where she can stay by his side forever. Whoa! Where has he been hiding all this charm? I'm getting a little flustered myself. The next day, Rosika gets a visit from the King of Levita. He wants to hear what really went down between the Grand Duke and the Prince, so she tells him the truth. Well, basically the truth. There's a lot of spinning the story in her favor, and she makes the Prince look like a real douche. But then again, he is a real douche, so I guess it's not that far from reality. Her little trick works well. The king seems very disappointed in his son and even threatens to kill him if he doesn't act more dignified when the other nobles arrive tomorrow. Though that doesn't look likely. The first thing Harome does the next day is kick down his bedroom door, nearly crushing Owen on his way to stop Rosika from telling anyone about what he tried to do to their maid. Meanwhile, Rex is following his own meticulous instructions and keeping the king occupied. They're also talking about the incident with the prince, slowly grinding down the father to be more and more angry at his son. At just the right time, they stumble upon a table in the garden where Rosika is entertaining the other noble ladies. And guess who has walked out with his pants around his ankles at that very moment? Another Viper plan executed to perfection. What happened was, after Owen riled up Harome, he came charging out into the gardens just in time to hear Rosika making a joke about the Grand Duke being impotent. Thinking they were all talking about him, he started yelling at her and pulled down his pants in front of everyone to prove that he had, you know, all the right equipment. This dude is completely nuts. Even if they were insulting him, why would you ever get your gear out in public just to prove a point? If this were the real world, he would have been arrested by now. At just the same time, Rex arrives with his father, who is so angry that he orders the guards to arrest him right away. Scrambling and scared, he brings up the bet. After all, his little man was out for everyone to see, so they've proven he's not a eunuch. But Rosika points out that 2 days haven't passed yet. They still have 8 hours before the time is up. And after a disgrace such as this, it doesn't look like Harome is going to make it that long. At least, part of him won't, if you catch my drift. Damn, the Viper is really ruthless. I mean, that guy sucks, but does he deserve to have his you-know-what cut off? Regardless of the moral concerns, Rosika's plans have all succeeded. Now it looks like the position of heir will be handed over to the princess, and the Viper has earned the sympathy of all the noble ladies who saw what happened. A double win, really. So now the Levita issue is out of the way. The next task is to get better acquainted with the northern nobles who have arrived at the Grand Duke's palace. She heads to Rex's room with a list of names for him to memorize, but when she knocks, there's no answer. Assuming he's asleep, she gets all worked up about the fact that she's been slaving away while he gets to take naps. So she barges in without waiting for an answer and, well, you can probably guess what happens next. Fresh from a shower, covered in scars and abs without a towel in sight, Rex seems surprisingly calm, until her eyes wander lower, that is. For a manhwa about princesses, there is sure a lot of naked men in this series. But you won't hear me complaining. I mean, look at that guy. Even when he's trying to cover himself up, he's hot as heck. Of course, Rosika rushes out of the room immediately, blushing bright red. She apologizes through the door, but she just can't get the image out of her head. Yeah, neither can we, bestie. Especially since she basically just proved that the rumors about him not having a working you-know-what are untrue. Very, very untrue. Once he's dressed, she slips back inside to find him sulking. He's holding his ear and suddenly reveals that he can't hear her speaking. Turns out, this is a castle-wide phenomenon. All throughout the evening, several of the nobles staying with them have been experiencing temporary deafness. All of them are heads of the important families, which makes it easier to track down the problem. The Grand Duke and the heads of 8 families were together at tea time that afternoon. Lucky for them, they've got the Viper, master of all poisons, on their side. Given the symptoms, she determines the poison to be Claris, a weed only found on the black market. Owen prepared the tea himself, but they used a blend brought by Baron Elgar as a gift. After he gives her a chance to inspect the tea, Rosika realizes the situation is far more serious than she realized. Because there was another herb in there, one that dissolves the eardrum less than 24 hours after intake. That gives them 18 hours to make an antidote and find the culprit. The Baron is a low-ranking aristocrat from the outskirts of the territory, so it's possible that he brought the tea because he was manipulated by someone pulling the strings. Rosika quickly gets angry with herself for missing the signs and not suspecting something sooner. While making the antidote, she starts slamming the tools and is about to do herself some harm when Rex catches her hand. He promises that he's fine and wipes her tears away like a real Prince Charming. Suddenly, coming back to herself, Rosika apologizes for her outburst and gets back to work. Quiet and steadfast by her side, Rex assures her there's no need to apologize and none of this is her fault. And it really isn't. She's the mastermind behind this whole operation, working all day and night to get this guy on the throne. She can't catch everything. Because they're short on time, Rosika has to replace one of the key ingredients for the antidote with her saliva. I'm not totally sold on the science behind it, but she says it will do the job. Writing all of this on a notepad so that Rex can read it, she tells him the quickest way to administer the antidote is like this. She grabs a handful of his collar and tells him to open his mouth. The poor little Duke is shaking, but she approaches him slowly and ever so gently gives him a kiss. Ah! It's happening, people! Everyone stay calm. At first, it seems like all those stories about Rex not knowing how to act around women might be true. He's a little awkward, and Rosika can tell he's nervous. But then he gets a boost of confidence and suddenly grabs her, pulling her into him like something out of a romance novel. Finally! I mean, it's not often that a girl gets to see the guy totally nude before they've even kissed. I feel like this was bound to happen sometime soon. Rosika pulls away and tucks him in bed, telling him the antidote will take effect in a couple of hours and that he should get some sleep. When she tries to walk away, he grabs her and frantically waves his hands around, asking if she's going to give everyone the antidote the way she gave it to him. Of course, the answer is no. The others will have to drink it with tea. Although, they will still get her saliva, which is super gross if you ask me. Once she's gone, the Duke is lying in bed, totally unable to fall asleep. It was a kiss, all right, but since it was for medicinal purposes, he's wondering if it really meant anything. Dude, were you there? Of course it meant something. That wasn't just swapping saliva back there, that was a whole damn embrace. Honestly, sometimes this guy can be so thick. Meanwhile, Rosika and Owen have passed out the antidotes and calmed down the angry nobles, who have all returned to health. But they can't just let this go. There will have to be an investigation. And it only gets more complicated because Baron Elgar didn't even know there was a problem with the tea. So clearly, this comes from higher up. Maybe even the same people who are trying to frame Rex for the murder of the Crown Prince? By now, they can assume their letter has reached the imperial family. So whoever has orchestrated this whole mess is doing so on purpose. Maybe even as a counterstrike. It's all very complicated, and honestly, I don't have a clue what's going on. But whoever it is has no idea that Rosika is on the other end, and they've just made her mad as heck. Before bed, she pops over to check in on Rex, who is still a little flustered every time she walks in. To avoid mishaps like today, she's brought him a bit of poison, which he will need to ingest every day to develop immunity to poison. She seems to be completely ignoring what happened between them earlier, but Rex isn't so smooth. In fact, he quietly asks if he can ingest the poison the same way they did earlier. The little scoundrel! After a little chuckle, Rosika agrees. He needs to take 1 dose per day to start with, and eventually that will increase over time. So the sweet little Duke sits down and gets himself emotionally prepared for another smooch. Only for his tactician to tell him they'll start tomorrow. So he wanders off to bed all shy, which is somehow even more adorable. The next day, they confront the Baron about the tea he brought. It's clear he had no idea about the contents, but they need to know his supplier, and they need to know ASAP. The young son steps up and tries to protect his father, confessing that he bought the tea himself because they couldn't afford expensive gifts like the other nobles. It was offered to him by a boy who came to their estate recently, someone named Hel, who was hired as a servant for the son. In fact, the servant accompanied them to this very castle. But since his father recovered from the poison, no one has seen him. Well, isn't that just the most suspicious thing you've ever heard? Rosika and Owen think so too, so they sprint off to go and find the little rat. The two of them put on a little bet to see who can find a Hel first, and Rosika goes all out, even changing into a latex cat suit, which seems a little extra if you ask me. When was latex even invented? You know what? Never mind. Now geared up and certainly looking the part, the Viper can do what she does best. Act like a criminal, only this time, she's catching them for once. Meanwhile, the kid they're looking for is cowering in a spot in the dungeons. He was given the tea by some fat noble who wanted it to go straight to Rex. He seems terrified, as anyone in his position would be. If he doesn't escape, he's done for. That much is certain. It seems little Hel has had a difficult life. When he was only young, he and his sister got arrested for thievery. Apparently, there was no loyalty between them, as his older sister was tired of him, telling him to fend for himself and find a way out on his own. Though she gave him directions, it seemed like she was a much more successful street thief than he was ever going to be. And the proof is in the pudding. All these years later, he's stuck in the same position. He made a stupid decision, trusted the wrong people, and wound up trapped. It takes literally minutes for Rosika to find him, only seconds before Owen. The poor kid is shaking with fear and only gets more antsy when they take him to an interrogation room for the Duke to question. With Owen holding a knife to his neck and Rex doing his usual terrifying commander thing, the truth soon comes out. He was offered $10 million to hand over the tea by a guild leader, who gives him quests like this from time to time. But Hel insists that he has no idea where the guild leader got the tea from or what the motivation was. He was even stupid enough to think that they were actually going to give him $10 million. So I have a feeling he's telling the truth. Some people are just that easily conned. The interrogation is interrupted when Rosika walks in, immediately demanding an update. The combination of Owen and the Viper discussing the best way to carve up a Hel sends the little kid into a panicked spiral, which you can hardly blame him for. She comes right up to him with a knife in hand. The poor guy probably thinks that's his last moment, but then suddenly, she rips a hole open in his back, exposing a huge scar right across his shoulders. Immediately, Rosika softens, reintroducing herself as the venomous Viper and acting all friendly. It turns out that Hel and her know each other from way back when they were both on the streets as kids. Hel was the younger brother of the chief of the beggar children, a terrifying kid named Tarantula, with the same blonde hair and red eyes. I think we can all put two and two together to figure out who this guy is. But the plot thickens. Apparently, Rosika always suspected that Tarantula was also someone with a past life, reborn with more knowledge than they knew what to do with. And plot twist number 2 is that the older sister figure that Hel remembered getting ditched by was actually Rosika. Good to know she's always been this cold-hearted. After they were locked up, she did help him find the way out, but he stepped in a bear trap and got a permanent injury. After that, Rosika watched from the shadows while Knight slashed him across the back, threatening to kill the kid. Now, she might be a Viper, but she's not that evil. So Rosika threw a rock to trigger the magical traps, hoping to give him enough time to get away. We'll stop here for today, guys. Yes, I know you want more. Don't forget to ask for the next part in the comment section. Thank you guys for watching and for your support. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Till the next one.